So if it all comes together, the upside scenarios, Aller one would be, as we expected, a full allowable well, 124 barrels a day. Same with Falc 4, so that's 200 and let's call it 250 barrels a day. If Turner one comes in at the high end, another 30, that's 280 barrels a day.
Hello, you're watching Proactive. I'm joined by Paul Welsh. He's the CEO of Buccaneer Energy. Paul, very good to speak with you. Why is the addition of this acreage an important step for Buccaneer?
It's an important step for us because it gives us optionality. So I think, as we discussed last time when we were discussing the results of LR1, we drilled a well that was as really close to the bounding fault, to the east. The sand thinned as we got closer to this fault, so we had to sidetrack it to the west. However, we couldn't sidetrack it at the time because we were within a boundary, a margin that is set by the rules of the Texas Railroad Commission that we had to be 330 feet off the west lease line, and we had drilled the well originally right at that point. So for us to go to the west, we needed the permission of the offset lease owners, and that was held by another company. We've now acquired that lease, so we can give essentially permission to ourselves to do that if we so choose. And so that's why we picked it up. Number one. Number two is the lease we picked up has two down dip wells. One's the Turner well, one's the Daniel well, both of which will be important in the future when we start to waterflood this area. So again, it provides us a lot of optionality by picking up this acreage, and we can decide, the sequence of events. Do we start the waterflood now? Do we drill the additional infill locations now? And so it provides flexibility that we didn't have in the past. So that's why it was an important piece of acreage to pick up for us.
Paul, what's the timeline and expected cost range for potential sidetrack of LR1 now that you've secured the new acreage?
So again, with LR1, the location's built, the roads are built, everything's there. For us to go in, we have to drill about 600 new feet of well bore, and we have to sidetrack it probably about 150 feet to the west. That estimated cost is about 125 to $150,000 gross. And again, we're a third of that, so our net would be about $50,000. So if we chose to do that, that'd be relative to the expected costs. It also depend on when we do it. So that assumes that we do it at the same time we drill, or the time that we drill around the Falc 4, so we don't have to pay an additional mob and demob into location, right?
And how quickly could the Turner 1 well be brought back into production, and what impact might that have on near-term output?
So the Turner 1 well can be put on production within the month. The issue with Turner 1 is slightly surprising. The Turner 1 is slightly down dip from the Falc 1. It's about 480 feet to the west, and it drilled into essentially a portion of a tar mat. So the crude that's produced from that well is a little bit thicker, a little bit denser than what we produce in the Falc 1. However, the well was shut in because of what they did on the surface. So there's a series of storage tanks on the surface that were holding the crude. When it gets cold, the crude congeals, gets a little bit more viscous, and so to sell it, the operator at the time had to heat up the crude. They used a thing called a heater treater. The operator at the time left the heater treater on overnight. The crude got too hot, and the stock tanks exploded. And quite like, I'm in the US, quite like 4th of July type of big explosion. And so they were completely destroyed. So what we have to do is essentially just move some new stock tanks in, or essentially tie the well back to our existing Falc 1 location. So not much to do. It should produce between 10 and 30 barrels a day, depending on where we are. How it's been shut in for quite a while, so we'll see. So probably a workover, pull the pump, pull the rods, do a little bit of work, and then either set some new stock tanks there, or just run a line over to our Falcon location and set another tank battery there and start to produce it. So that's to be decided. It'll be a cost issue, and see we have excess tankage there, so it's probably makes more sense to just pump it the 500 feet over to our location, make it a single point where we can haul the crude away, make our operations a little bit easier. So that's a work in progress. We just picked this up, literally today. So all these things need to be decided. We've obviously got some rough costs, but we need to tighten that up. So again, 10 to 30 barrels a day, we could probably do it within a month. But it's also going to depend on a number of other things about how we view the water flood, how our interaction with the Railroad Commission goes and that sort of thing.
Mhm. And can you explain how the discussions with the Texas Railroad Commission on an enhanced recovery unit could change the long-term production profile at Pine Mills?
Sure. So what you do is in this part of the world, you put water in the ground and you essentially raise the reservoir pressure. And when you inject water, you essentially drive oil to your existing producers. And so that's called a water flood. To form a water flood, you need agreement to form a unit. So that's all the leaseholders have to agree, and then everybody divvies up what they believe is in the ground, and they all share equally based on what's produced from the unitized wells. So that's a process that's well understood. It'd probably take a couple of months to pull together, and then we would essentially form the unit, designate what the producing wells are going to be, where the injection wells are going to be located, how the facilities are going to be tied together. And so we've started the initial discussion with the Railroad Commission about probably 6 months ago about what it would take to form a unit. We haven't progressed it because we needed to pick up the acreage. The offset leaseholder was interested to a certain extent, but then they had other more pressing interests, so they decided to exit. So now that we have the acreage, we can more formally start the process. So I would anticipate in Q1 2026 we'll have at least, if it's not complete, we'll have a very a good start on what we need to do. It's not that many leaseholders. It's really only 2 to 3 leases, so it should be relatively easy to pull together. All the other infrastructure exists because we have a very active water flood over in Pine Mills that we've been producing for 70 years. So it's an incremental increase in what we would do in the Pine Mills area. So it's relatively easy to implement. But there is some paperwork, there is some discussion has to have with the authority, and that process will get kicked off now.
Hmm. With Falk 4 still on track to spud in December, how do you see the combined impact of LR1, Turner 1, and Falk 4 shaping Buccaneer's growth going into 2026?
So if it all comes together, the upside scenarios, Aller one would be, as we expected, a full allowable well, 124 barrels a day. Same with Falk 4, so that's 200 and let's call it 250 barrels a day. If Turner one comes in at the high end, another 30, that's 280 barrels a day, of which we have a third. Let's make clear we have a third of that. So we're looking at 90 barrels a day net to us. That's as good as it can get. The flip side is because we have a low oil price environment and we have the ability now to water flood this area, we have to look at the sequencing of events. When we implement the water flood, what will happen is that the recoverable volume in the area will double. So, on a primary development, which is what we are at the moment, we would get about 15 to 20% of the original in place. With a water flood, we'll get closer to 50%, right? So it makes a lot of sense to implement this kind of as soon as, so we can, keep the momentum going. We have all the facilities in place to handle any kind of disposal needs and any kind of rejection needs we have. So it's one of those things that we're going to discuss with our partner. How quickly do we progress? What do we progress? But at the moment, we haven't changed our plans. So it'll be, Falcon 4, Aller 1 sidetrack. At the same time, we would return the Turner 1 to production if that works out. Again, that is now subject to discussion with our partners. We'll see how it goes. But that's kind of the way it looks. We're making about 100 barrels a day, excuse me, in the Falcon area at the moment, between the two wells that we have. So if we can get water in the ground and essentially double that, that's a really cheap way to increase the production that costs very little. So again, these are the type of things we're gonna investigate. That's why we picked up this acreage. Again, it provides that optionality, gives us a lot of flexibility in what we can do, and so that's why it was an important part of the process.
Paul, I hope you continue to keep us updated with your progress. Happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you very much. I certainly will. I appreciate your time.
Paul Welsh, the CEO of Buccaneer Energy.